Here's the weird part. For most of history, a city that smelled awful was not a city in crisis. It was just a city. That sounds wrong to us, because modern people are used to a huge amount of separation. Your toilet flushes and the problem disappears. Your trash is gone by morning. Meat is processed somewhere else. Wastewater goes into pipes you never see. If something dies on a city street, it gets removed fast. Most of the dirty parts of urban life are pushed outside your senses almost immediately. But in older cities, much more of that stayed close. And that is the real answer to why old cities smelled so bad. Not because people in the past were uniquely disgusting, not because they enjoyed living in filth, but because the things we hide today used to happen much nearer to where people lived, walked, slept, bought food, and got water. In older cities, the street was not just a street. It was traffic, drainage, labor, waste, animals, and commerce, all in one place. The basic functions of city life were packed together much more tightly than we're used to. Start with the most obvious part: human waste. People in the past did try to deal with it. This part matters because the lazy version of history gets it wrong. Medieval and early modern towns had privies, cesspits, chamber pots, fines, ordinances, and workers who removed waste. In some places, waste removal was regulated and licensed. A cesspit that was maintained could be unpleasant but manageable. A neglected one could become overwhelming. So no, the whole city was not simply a lawless open toilet. That's too simple. The real problem was proximity. Even when waste was managed, it was still nearby. It sat in pits under or beside buildings. It lingered in courtyards. It soaked into the ground. It moved when it rained. It thickened when it was hot. And without a flush system or water trap to block odors, the smell didn't politely stop at the toilet. Waste sat there until it decomposed or someone physically removed it. Which means one household smell could easily become a neighborhood smell, and a neighborhood smell could become part of the city's air. And once a city grew large enough, that local system started losing. That's one of the biggest differences between modern cities and older ones. Today, city waste is handled by a huge continuous system. In many older cities, disposal was more local, more manual, and easier to overwhelm. More people meant more pits filling up, more hauling, more leakage, more overflow, more delay. A city could know something was filthy and still fail to stay ahead of it. People complained about smells, blocked ditches, and foul lanes for a reason. Authorities issued rules for a reason. They were trying to manage a problem that kept returning faster than they could fully solve it. And that still wasn't the whole smell, because old cities were also full of animals. Before engines, cities ran on muscle. Horses pulled carts, wagons, coaches, deliveries, buses, cabs. If a city moved, horses moved it. And horses do not work quietly and cleanly. They eat, sweat, urinate, and drop manure constantly. London Museum's overview of the Great Stink notes that manure piled up in the streets from horse-drawn carriages right alongside other urban waste. So even before you get to sewers and rivers, the ordinary street already had its own strong organic smell built into it. Now add everything else animals brought with them. In many towns and cities, people also kept pigs, poultry, and other animals. Some of them were food, some were labor, some were just part of everyday household survival. Then add stables, fodder, mud, wet straw, rotting scraps, and carcasses that were not always removed instantly. The city was not just full of human bodies. It was full of animal bodies too, living and dead, useful and discarded, all contributing their own layer to the air. Medieval authorities worried about carcasses, dung, and butchery waste because those things didn't stay neatly in one category called waste. They spread into streets, waterways, and smell. Then add work. This is where modern viewers often underestimate the past. A lot of work that we've pushed far away from residential life used to happen much closer to home. Butchers cut animals in town. Blood ran where people passed. Offal had to go somewhere. Fish spoiled fast. Tanneries processed animal hides in ways that were notoriously pungent. In late medieval sources, authorities repeatedly worried about butcher's waste, dead animals, and decaying flesh corrupting both water and air. One royal complaint about London described putrefied blood running in the streets and entrails thrown into the Thames, creating stenches and sickness. That is why smell in an old city wasn't one smell, it was layers. Manure, urine, blood, rotting scraps, wet leather, mud, smoke, standing water, human waste, animal waste, fish gone bad, ditches gone stagnant, all of it sitting in one dense environment where people lived very close to one another. In a modern city, many of those smells are separated by distance, zoning, enclosed buildings, sanitation crews, refrigerated transport, and sealed plumbing. In an older city, they stacked. And then there was water. This may be the strangest part for a modern viewer, because today we mentally separate water from waste. Clean water belongs in one system, sewage belongs in another. That separation feels obvious to us. Historically, it often wasn't there. Rivers and streams were lifelines. They carried goods. They helped with washing. They powered work. They supported trade. They also received runoff, refuse, dung, industrial byproducts, and sewage. Medievalists' survey of urban pollution points out that rivers, streams, and ditches in many medieval cities were used to get rid of all sorts of waste, while officials feared the corruption of both air and water. Medieval London relied heavily on waterways, and complaints piled up when ditches were obstructed by dung and other filth or when waste entered the Thames. That creates a very different kind of city, because now the place that carries things away is still part of everyday life. People work beside it, walk beside it, wash near it, sometimes draw water from systems connected to it. So if waste disposal is weak, crowded, or overwhelmed, the city starts feeding contamination back into itself. That overlap is one of the deepest reasons old cities could smell so bad. Waste was not just present, it was circulating, and people absolutely noticed. This is another place where modern people get the past wrong. They were not all just strolling around cheerfully, unaware of the stench. Medieval and later urban records are full of complaints, ordinances, warnings, and fines. Authorities worried about foul air, blocked ditches, bad smells, rotting carcasses, and polluted waterways. In York, in 1332, Edward III's government complained of an abominable smell from dung, manure, and other filth filling the streets and lanes. So yes, they knew, they cared. They tried to respond, but caring is not the same thing as having infrastructure. That is the hinge of the whole story. A city can know it smells bad. A city can hate the smell. A city can punish dumping. A city can hire cleaners. And still, if the population is large, the work is constant, the water is vulnerable, the streets are crowded, and waste remains close, the smell comes back. Which is why the smell became normal. Not pleasant, normal. People can adapt to things they dislike if those things are built into daily life. A person living in an old city might hate the smell of a ditch, a privy, a tannery, or the summer river. But if the entire urban system keeps producing those smells, then smell stops being an event and becomes background, not because nobody minds, because there is no version of city life they can easily switch to instead. Now this is where London gives us the perfect payoff. In the hot summer of 1858, the River Thames smelled so bad that it disrupted Parliament itself. London Museum says London had outgrown its old waste disposal customs, with waste clogging the Thames, smaller rivers, and even city streets. The heat drove the smell into overdrive. Temperatures stayed high, the river sank low, sewage baked on the banks, and curtains and blinds were soaked in chloride of lime in an attempt to block the stench. Parliament rushed through legislation to fund a new sewer system, and Bazalgette's brick-lined tunnels became the basis of London's sewers. That moment matters because it makes the whole logic visible. The Great Stink was not just a gross anecdote. It was what happened when an old urban system finally became impossible for powerful people to ignore. London had gotten too big for proximity-based waste management. Too many people, too much waste, too much dependence on a river that was still tied to daily life. The smell became political only when elite noses were forced to live inside the same reality the city had been producing for years. There's one more twist here. For centuries, many people believed bad smells themselves spread disease, the old miasma idea. That was not the full truth. Cholera spread mainly through the fecal-oral route, especially through contaminated water and food, not through smell by itself. But that does not mean people were foolish to fear stench. In a world where foul smells often came from sewage, rot, stagnant water, and decaying waste, bad smells were still warning signs. The smell was not the disease. The smell was evidence that something dangerous might be nearby. So what changed? Not human nature. Separation. Modern cities became less foul when they got better at separating functions that had once been jammed together. Sewers moved waste underground. Piped water reduced contact with contaminated sources. Regular removal made trash and carcasses leave faster. Cleaner paving and drainage changed what sat in the street. Polluting work was pushed farther from homes. And over time, transport shifted away from streets full of working horses and their manure. Modern cities did not become scent-free, of course, but they became much better at moving the mess away before it could dominate daily life. And that is the part worth remembering. A modern city that doesn't smell too bad is not natural. It is engineered. It is the product of pipes, sewers, trucks, regulations, zoning, water treatment, drainage, distance, and constant removal. It only feels normal because the system is doing its job before you notice it. So the next time you catch that sour blast from a sewer grate after rain, or the smell of trash baking in the summer heat, or a foul alley behind a restaurant, remember what you're actually getting. Not just a bad smell, a small crack in the modern city, a brief reminder of the older one, the city where almost everything happened within nose range.